It was December 1944. The forests of the Ardennes were silent under a thick coat of snow. But that silence was deceptive. Deep within the trees, engines rumbled and treads cracked through the frost. The last great gamble of Nazi Germany, the Battle of the Bulge, had begun. At the head of the spear was one man feared by both friend and foe, Joachim Peiper, a ruthless tank commander known for his speed, aggression, and cold precision. He led his men with fire in his eyes and steel in his veins. His Tiger tanks, the most formidable machines of war, thundered toward the American lines like iron beasts from a nightmare. But what Peiper didn't know, what no German soldier knew, was that their greatest weapon was about to betray them, not from an enemy shell, but from something far more silent and far more fatal, the lack of fuel. And in that frozen wilderness, surrounded by snow, smoke, and ghosts of fallen men, Joachim Peiper would face not only the enemy, but the cruelest twist of fate any commander could endure, to be so close to victory, and yet utterly powerless. The plan was daring, insane even. Hitler's last hope was to split the Allied armies in two, seize Antwerp, and force the Western powers into peace talks. To do that, he unleashed his best SS Panzer divisions, armored giants led by officers like Peiper. In the early hours of December 16, 1944, Peiper's tanks roared to life. The ground trembled beneath the Tiger IIs as they tore through the misty forests of the Ardennes. American units were caught completely off guard. Villages fell one after another under Peiper's advance, Stavelot, La Glaise, and the road to Malmedy. The German columns moved like a black tide, sweeping aside resistance with brutal precision. Peiper's men believed this was it, the turning point. "One last push," he told them, "and we'll be home by Christmas." But behind his steely words he knew the truth. The fuel situation was critical. The offensive depended on capturing American fuel depots. Every kilometer burned precious reserves. The Luftwaffe couldn't protect their supply lines. Allied air superiority turned every road, every convoy, into a death trap. Still, Peiper pressed forward, driven by orders, pride, and the desperate illusion of victory. His tanks rolled through American positions, their cannons belching fire into the frozen night. Yet even as the enemy retreated, his radio crackled with bad news. Fuel convoys delayed, supply trucks destroyed, barrels empty. The iron monsters that gave him power were slowly becoming steel coffins. And then came the moment every commander dreads, the sound he could not bear to hear, the sputter of an empty engine. The Tigers rolled to a halt, one by one. Peiper climbed out of his tank into the biting cold. The snow fell softly on his black uniform as he stared at his silent machines. His army was still miles from its objective. The fuel that was supposed to carry him to glory had abandoned him in the heart of the Ardennes. The silence that followed was deafening. No engines, no radio chatter, only the wind howling through the snow-dusted pines. Joachim Peiper stood still for a long moment, his breath freezing in the air as he stared at his motionless tanks. He had led some of the most brutal assaults on the Eastern Front. He had fought the Russians in bitter cold, crossed rivers of ice, and survived hellish retreats. But this was different. There was no battle cry, no enemy in sight, only emptiness. His entire armored column, the pride of the Waffen-SS, had come to a standstill because of a single, invisible enemy: fuel. Peiper's adjutant approached, his face pale beneath the frost. "Sir, we're dry, the entire column." Peiper's eyes narrowed. "All of it?" The young officer nodded grimly. "The supply trucks never made it through. Allied aircraft hit them near Ligneuville." Peiper clenched his fists. The Luftwaffe was grounded by the weather, communications were collapsing, and the terrain, steep hills, narrow roads, endless forest, turned any retreat into a nightmare. His division was surrounded by American units, regrouping fast. But retreat was not in Peiper's blood. "Then we hold," he growled. "We hold until we find fuel, or die trying." His men dug in around the small Belgian village of La Glaise, fortifying it with what they could salvage: anti-tank guns, machine guns, and sheer willpower. For a few days, they fought like cornered wolves. Every time an American Sherman appeared over the ridge, the Tigers fired back with deadly accuracy, their 80mm guns roaring through the blizzard. Yet for every Allied tank they destroyed, 2 more seemed to arrive. The American artillery was relentless. The skies cleared, and soon P-47 Thunderbolts swooped down from above, shredding the snow-covered landscape with rockets and machine gun fire. Inside one of the ruined houses, Peiper studied his map by candlelight. His gloves were off, his fingers stiff with cold. The fuel situation was hopeless. His tanks couldn't move, and his men were running out of food and ammunition. Still, he refused to surrender. "Fuel will come," he told himself. It must. But deep down he knew. The Reich was crumbling. The supply lines were gone. The miracle Hitler promised was nothing more than smoke and snow. Outside, the once mighty Tiger tanks sat buried under white drifts, silent, frozen monuments to Germany's dying war machine. And somewhere in that stillness, Peiper realized the truth he had spent his career avoiding. No amount of discipline or ruthlessness could fight against time itself. The end was not coming with a battle cry, but with silence. By December 22nd, the Ardennes was no longer a battlefield, it was a graveyard. The once proud panzer column that had roared across Belgium now sat lifeless and buried in snow. Peiper's mighty Tiger II tanks, those iron beasts that had once crushed cities, were now nothing but steel coffins surrounded by white silence. Peiper moved among his men who crouched in the ruins of La Glaise, cold, hungry, exhausted. The youngest among them were barely 19, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow. They clung to rifles and machine guns, not from hope of victory, but from habit, the soldier's instinct to hold on, no matter how hopeless the fight had become. The sound of distant artillery echoed through the valley, growing louder. The Americans were closing in. For Peiper, surrender was unthinkable. He ordered his men to destroy anything that could fall into Allied hands: weapons, radios, even maps. The Tiger tanks that couldn't move were loaded with explosives. The night sky glowed red, as his own machines of war were reduced to twisted metal. Inside a shattered farmhouse, Peiper stood by a broken window staring out at the flames. His officers urged him to break out while there was still time. "We can slip through the woods, reach our lines before dawn," one said. Peiper shook his head. "And leave my wounded behind? Never." That single sentence carried the weight of everything. Beneath the cold steel and ruthless reputation, there was still a soldier's code buried somewhere inside him: loyalty to his men. But loyalty wouldn't save them now. By morning, American forces surrounded La Glaise completely. Tanks rolled into position, infantry advancing through the smoke and snow. Peiper's men fought with desperation. Snipers hidden in church towers, MG-42s rattling from the ruins, grenades flying through the air. The clash of iron and fire filled the valley one last time. But it was no use. The Tigers were gone. The fuel was gone. And so was the war's illusion of German invincibility. At last, Peiper gave the order. "We move on foot." Under the cover of night, he led the remnants of his unit through the forest. 800 men, reduced to shadows, trudging silently through snow that reached their knees. Many collapsed from exhaustion or frostbite, too weak to continue. Others were captured or lost forever in the endless white. By the time Peiper reached German lines days later, only a fraction remained. The once feared commander of the Ardennes had escaped, but his legend had died in the snow of La Glaise. The Battle of the Bulge would rage on for weeks, but for Joachim Peiper, the war was already over. His tanks were silent, his men broken, and the dream of a final German victory frozen forever in the Belgian winter. When Peiper finally stumbled back across German lines, his once immaculate uniform was torn and frozen stiff. His boots were soaked in ice and mud, his face hollow from hunger and sleepless nights. The man who had led a column of steel now returned on foot, carrying nothing but the crushing weight of failure. Behind him, the Ardennes lay littered with burned-out tanks and frozen corpses, silent witnesses to the end of Germany's last gamble. The offensive that was meant to split the Allies had instead split Germany's own spirit. It wasn't just Peiper who had run out of fuel. It was the entire Reich. German generals still tried to paint the battle as a strategic withdrawal, but no one believed it anymore. Every commander knew the truth. Without fuel, without supplies, without air cover, they were fighting ghosts. The Tiger and Panther tanks that once struck fear into Allied hearts were now abandoned monuments to arrogance. Peiper sat quietly in a field headquarters, staring at a map littered with red arrows pushing deeper into German territory. An aide offered him coffee, but he didn't respond. The fire crackled beside him, yet the chill of that Ardennes winter never left his bones. In the weeks that followed, Allied bombers swept across the skies unopposed. American and British troops pushed relentlessly eastward. Every mile gained was paid for in blood, but Germany's ability to fight back was disintegrating. Peiper's elite units, the once feared spearhead of the Waffen-SS, were now scattered remnants, hunted and broken. The irony was painful. Germany's engineers had built some of the most advanced machines of war ever made: the Tiger II, the jet fighter, the V-2 rocket. But none of it mattered without the fuel to move, the factories to build, or the manpower to sustain it. In the end, it wasn't Allied firepower that destroyed the Reich. It was logistics, cold, unglamorous, unstoppable. For Joachim Peiper, the Battle of the Bulge marked the end of his myth. The ruthless commander who once believed in a final victory had become a symbol of its futility. When the war ended months later, he was captured, tried for war crimes, and imprisoned, his legacy forever shadowed by both brilliance and brutality. But his story remains a chilling reminder of the truth behind war, that even the most powerful weapons are useless without the lifeblood that fuels them, and even the fiercest armies can freeze to death in their own ambition. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last throw of the dice, and when the dice stopped rolling, the only thing left was silence, and the echo of engines that would never roar again. If this story pulled you into the frozen chaos of the Ardennes, or made you reflect on how ambition and reality collided in the final days of the Third Reich, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to World War Ashes, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which World War II story do you think revealed the true turning point of history? Together, we'll keep uncovering the forgotten moments that changed the world, one story at a time.